Short pole fishing for big carp is a very underrated method this time of year. We all know about shallow fishing and margin fishing. Today I'm going to show you exactly how to feed it, what you need to be looking for in terms of where to fish and the options you've got, the rigs we're going to use, and hopefully you can get on the bank and have a bumper day with it. The first thing to look at, and one of the most important things when you first get to your peg, is where you're going to choose to fish. Now, when it comes to plumbing up, anybody who's watched my videos in the past knows that I'm a big believer of using a light plummet. But when I'm fishing in open water and I'm trying to sort of find where the silt is and where the shelves are, I do like to use a bit of a heavier plummet. So here I've got my standard 10 gram, which I'd use for my margins and stuff like that. But for this open water short pole fishing, I like to use quite a big heavy plummet. So 30 gram is my choice. I'm just going to whip this on and show you what the peg's like. Picking where you choose to fish is really important. I can't stress that enough. Try and fish where the bottom's hard enough where you can catch them, but you're not too close to yourself where they're not going to feel safe and come in. I would just try and pick a nice steady depth that I feel like the fish are safe, and the only time I would ever change that line is to come in if it was really good and fish were coming up off the bottom. What you're doing there is you're reducing your water from say 6 foot down to 5 foot, and you're coming on to that harder bottom. You don't want to be going onto that soft bottom. It's going to make life really hard for you. So where I've chosen to fish, depth wise, it's about 6.5 foot. Now, for this particular venue, that's a good depth because it's quite a deep venue. It's 10-12 foot out there, so it's roughly going to be about half depth of where I'm fishing. So I'm halfway up the shelf, but that's all relevant to the venue you're fishing. If it's 6 foot deep, you might only get 3 or 4 foot on that short pole line. So when I first ship out, I pick my marker. I've already plumbed up so I know where I'm fishing, but just for you at home, I pick my marker, which is the skinniest little tree on the far bank. That's how accurate I need to be. I'm not fishing over an area of say a foot or two. I'm fishing in a pint glass, literally. So when I first lean forward, you'll see I'm about 1.5 inches over depth. Now my line length between my pole tip is about 6 or 8 inches. What this means is that my rig can't drift beyond that. So if I lean forward, I'm just touching the bottom there. So what I'm looking for is an average depth, if you like. I don't want to be trying to be too cute and just fish with my pellet just touching the bottom, because if it drifts off that shelf, you've got to remember the shelf is sloping away from you. If it drifts beyond it with the wind, I'll be off the bottom. So I'm looking at that marker. There, I'm just touching the bottom, just nice. I'm about 1 inch on. The body of the float is out of the water. If I lean forward 1 inch, just touching. If I lean forward 2 inches or 3 inches, you can see there it just drops off. Now come back to my little spot, that's where I'm happy fishing. If I come back 1 inch, it comes up a little bit. If I come back again, keeps coming up. If I come back a good section, probably 1 metre, you'll see it comes up about 1 foot. So I'm going over that little bit of a shelf. It's not going to be as silty when you come further up the shelf. So I'm right on the end of my section, it's on the end of my elbow, underneath my elbow there. I'm looking at my marker and I'm happy with that. I've got a good 1.5 inches over depth. I would rather be slightly over depth than off the bottom by 6-8 mil literally. So try and make sure your bait's still on the bottom, anchored to the bottom. It's not going to move about. When them bigger fish come in and start pushing your rig about, you've got a bit of stability in your rig. And that there is exactly why I've chosen to fish that little spot. A little bit on the tackle I'd use for this, it's got to be durable. That's one thing. When you're catching big carp, your gear's under a lot of pressure. So starting with the elastic, I like to use a strong hollow elastic. Black hydro is my choice for this. You could even use red hydro if you was catching a lot of big fish. But when you've got a mixture of like smaller carp, I just feel like black's perfect. So that's my elastic choice. Mainline choice, 0.22 N gauge. Reason for this again is all about durability. You're using big shots, so you don't have to worry about using little, tiny shots on your line pinging off. You're going to be using number 8s and 9 shots for your rigs. And then down to the float, I have a little back shot just above this. This just stops your rig getting blown off the shelf. It can move sometimes 4 to 6 inches beyond it. You don't want that. Your rig's going to be off the bottom. So a little back shot, and then the float depends on the wind conditions. Today I've opted for a 0.5 carbon pinger. Now the wind's been off my back, I've not needed to use a wire stem one, but if it was a little bit choppy and it was in my face, sometimes a wire version can be better. But where I can, I like to use carbon. I just think it fishes better, it's a little bit more robust as well. So 0.5 gram of a pinger. The bristle on these is quite long, I like that, it gets it under the surface skim. Don't need loads of float showing, just enough so that you can read your bites, but I like to have a longer bristle when I'm fishing big open waters like this. Coming onto smaller lakes, again, you could use slightly lighter version of it. And then coming down to the shotting pattern, I like to keep it dead simple. I want to be lowering that pellet in at my pace, so I'm going to use a little bulk of number 8s, one number 9 dropper. My bulk is probably going to be about 12 inches from my hook, and then I have a dropper just above my hook length, which is 5 inches long, so it's probably about 6 inches from my hook by the time I've had my dropper and my knots. And then my hook length material is 0.17 N gauge to a 14's SMWG, so a little bit stronger than the SLWG. Again, I want a nice durable strong hook. If I was catching a lot of smaller fish, again, just tailor your hook length to suit. No problem in going up to 0.19, I've no problem to going to 0.15 if I'm fishing for, you know, 3-4 pound carp, but the stamp of fish that we're catching today, 0.17 marries up perfect with that. So when it comes to bait choice and what I choose to feed, you've got many different options. You could fish maggots, casters, corn, pellets, hemp paste, you know, you've got lots of options there. The reason I've chose pellets today is simply because meat is banned. Now, meat is very soft bait, you will catch a bit of everything from small fish right the way up to big fish on it. That would probably be my number 1 choice for a lot of short pole line fishing. Reason being is I can catch the skimmers, small carp, which is lots of in here, and also the big carp. Now, as to fish maggots and casters, I probably won't get as many big carp and I get mivered by the smaller fish. Now, in match situations, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the most weight. That's the reason we try to fish baits like hard pellets. Hard pellets will single out them bigger fish. You will miss out on a few smaller fish, but by picking the right particle size, you can still catch a mixture of both. So for feeding today, I'm going to go for the 6mm version. I have got some 8mm because if I start getting mivered by a few smaller fish, i.e. skimmers and little stocky carp, but I know there's some big carp present, then I can start changing and feeding 8mm. But past experience on this particular venue, 6mm has been the better option. The reason that is because you can feed more particles, you can be more aggressive. By fishing 8mm, you can't be throwing in 20 and 30 every chuck. You're just going to fill the fish up too quick. By feeding a smaller particle, you can feed more of it, make a little bit more noise, and carp are definitely attracted to the noise. So when it comes to starting the session, what I always like to do on venues like this is start accurately. And what I mean by that is introduce some pellets via a little pot. So I'm going to start on a 6mm pellet, see where we go from there. Some days 6mm can be good, some days a little bit bigger hook bait can be better if you want to target the better fish. So I'm going to feed what I'm fishing. I've got a medium guru pot on the end of the pole here, and I'm going to fill it to the top. So roughly that would give me around about 30 pellets. So fill that up. If the lake was a little bit shallower, I probably wouldn't feed that many, but because we're fishing in sort of 6.5 foot, we want to make sure the bait gets down. There'll be skimmers and little stockies down there, so your pellets will be getting at. I always feel like when you're fishing on the bigger lakes, you've got to feed a little bit more positive. Now 30 pellets is not a lot of bait, don't get me wrong, but if I was fishing on a venue that was 3 or 4 foot deep, I might only put 10 in. So what I'm going to do here is purposely flick my bulk past the shelf, so my float is going away into the deeper bit, lean forward an inch to compensate for the pot on the end of my pole, put my pellets in, and then draw my pole with it touching my elbow and draw it back in line with my marker and let my rig come in on an angle. And I'm watching my float now. As soon as it goes straight, I know it's underneath my pole tip, then I can put it on the spot. Something that will make you more efficient when doing this is putting your pellets in your pot and dunking your pot under the water. Your pellets are obviously dry. If you don't dunk them, they tend to bounce out while you're shipping out. So what this does, just eliminates that, just makes your pot sort of like your pellets clogging your pot a little bit on purpose, just so that when you're shipping out, you're not losing your pellets. So fill your pot up, dunk it under the water. Once you've shipped out there, lean forward slightly, empty your pot, float on top of it, and it's just going to make you more efficient when fishing hard pellets. Now, because I'm fishing on a shelf, I want to always try and make sure that I feed either on my float or just an inch or two past it. I never want to feed up shelf. So you imagine the shelf's here, I don't want my bait in the shallower bit closer towards me, because the fish will swim straight past that to your bait and you're going to get a lot of foul hookers. So when you put your rig in, imagine an imaginary line. You're fishing 5 metres, imagine that line at 5 metres. You either want to feed smack on top of your float or an inch or two behind it, just so that your bait is down the slope ever so slightly or where you're fishing. So straight away, little indication there. Could be small fish, play it by ear, just feel our way into the session. You've only really got 2 options with this. You can either cut bait and be accurate, or you can loose feed bait, which is not as accurate. There we go, bite straight away. Which is not as accurate, but it will draw more fish into your peg. The aim of the game is to basically get to the point where you can just throw pellets in, keep bringing new fish into your peg, and your peg will constantly get better, or at least stay the same. The downside when throwing all the time is that you can feed too many pellets, and what can happen then is your bites slow down. So just play it, mix it up, see how many fish are in your peg. When the fishing's really good, throw pellets, great. If the fishing starts to slow, pot a few. And again, it's always worth starting just with a pot, just to get that quick run of fish. I think it's one of the new stocky carp. Still a decent stamp fish, but the general average in here is probably like 5 to 8 pound. So although not a massive carp, probably still 3 or 4 pound. So that was on a 6mm. So let's just pop him back. Hook bait choice is really important. You know, when the fish are feeding really aggressive, sometimes matching the hatch, feeding 6mm and fishing a 6mm on the hook can be absolutely deadly. So think about your hook bait choices. Try 6mm, try an 8mm, try a big Coppins 8mm, you know, and sometimes, you know, you're fishing a bomb and stuff like that, double pellet can be good. A double 6mm or a double 8mm, just a big target bait can also work as well. So think about what you're putting on the hook. You'll be amazed how much of a difference just a slight change in hook bait can make to your catch rate. So that worked. I'm going to start again, but what I'm actually doing here is trying to select a slightly bigger 6mm. So I'm looking at them. That one looks a little bit bigger. Onto my bait band. I don't want to pick out the little small ones, they won't stand out as much. So just centralise that bait band, make sure it's in the middle of that pellet, and then I'm going to repeat the process. Now I'd carry on doing this until I can't get a bite. Now on a day like today, when you're on the lake on your own or you're pleasure fishing, it'll probably last a lot longer. But in a match situation, you might get away 15, 20 minutes, half an hour doing this, and then you're going to have to look to start drawing fish in. You're basically looking for them fast 100 million mile an hour bites. They're the ones that the fish are just going to grab your pellet and your float goes under really fast, not stopping. Anything that's sort of slow and brushes to the side, it's generally the fish brushing into your peg, into your line, sorry, and they're in your peg, sat there not doing much, just hovering over your bait. So trying to identify the right bite, which is normally a million mile an hour, really quick, imitates that fish, sucking that bait up, that's what you're looking for. So there, a little indication, a little bit of an head wobble. Don't know if it's a massive fish, doesn't feel massive. So a little bit of control on it early, a couple of strips of that pullable, and when you're using a pullable, try to lower your tip. As you pull it out your pole, try and lower your tip towards it. Me just pulling at this end doesn't really do anything. You have to lower your tip towards it, and that'll just tension your elastic up a little bit better. So I've got a bit of control on him now, he's not going nuts. We've been fortunate today, we've gone in, and this is genuine first chuck, second chuck. We've had 2 carp, this would be a brilliant start in a match, but obviously a little bit different when you're pleasure fishing. You get the run of the lake to yourself. So that's one of the slightly better ones. Not massive, still only probably 3.5, 4 pound, but it's not the little pound, 2 pound stockies that we was thinking we may get. So this chuck, I'm going to try a slightly different hook bait. I've had 2 carp straight away there, no skimmer bites or no smaller fish. If I was getting them and I wanted to try and single out the carp, this is what I would do anyway. I'd put a slightly bigger hook bait on. So I'm going to go for one of the Skretting 8mm, just a little bit bigger than the 6s, but it's quite a lightish hook bait compared to, you know, a Coppins 8mm that I put on the hook. So it's not quite the biggest 8mm I've got, but it's bigger than these 6mm. So again, I'm just going to keep feeding a full pot of them. It's probably 25-30 pellets. Put my rig in and everything exactly the same. And then basically I'll fish this until my peg starts to die, which it will die at some point. It might be after 4 or 5 fish, might be after this fish, do you know what I mean? It could happen that quick. So I've been feeding there, nice and accurate with a pot. Pegs started to go a little bit funny, missing an odd bite, stuff like that. The reason for this can be 2 things. Either you're running out of fish, which could be the case here, or it could also be the fact that you're keeping your bait too tight and the fish are coming into one little tight spot and they need to be spread out. So now is the perfect time to start loose feeding. So I'm going to use my pot still to get my bait nice and tight. And then when I hook a fish now, what I'm going to do is start to throw a few pellets after I've hooked a fish. Peg there now started getting a little bit better, potting a little bit of bait, catching a fish, throwing some pellets afterwards. I feel like there's enough bites there now where I can take that pot off completely and just try and make my peg as good as it can possibly be. What I mean by that is when I'm constantly throwing bait, I'm going to be driving fishing constantly. So I'm going to go out there, exactly the same, put my rig out, but I'm using my float now as my marker. So I'm just going to put my float on the water roughly for a second or 2 and immediately throw them pellets. So 10 pellets twice, pick that rig up, let it fully straighten and then wait for me bite. And then once I've hooked a fish, I'm going to do the same again and feed again. So I hook a fish, 10 pellets, 10 pellets. It's such an easy way of fishing. You've just got, the biggest thing is regulating your bait. Don't start getting giddy and throwing too much in, and make sure that you're throwing enough in. Sometimes one of the biggest mistakes I see is people don't throw enough bait in. They're only throwing 4 or 5 pellets. That's not going to hold a shoal of hungry carp. They're going to come in, mop your bait up and be gone. Especially in match situations where there's other anglers competing for the bait. So I've just missed a bite there. I'm not going to feed again just yet because I feel like there's still going to be some pellets on the bottom. But if I'd have missed that bite after say 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, I might have to feed again every sort of 2 minutes. I don't want to be letting my bait get at and there's nothing there for them. What you tend to find with this as well, sometimes your peg will go a little bit slower, and that's just naturally because your bait's a bit more spread. So I've hooked one, so I'm just going to feed, get him under control. What's happening now is them pellets that I've just chucked in, hopefully they'll be drawing new fish in. They'll be waiting for me when I go back in. hopefully now the peg will start to get really good. So what you'll tend to do as well, because I'm feeding more bait, i.e. throwing more bait, a little bit more regular, you'll tend to find that you need that standout hook bait. So that 8mm, you know, sometimes your 6mm can be like a needle in a haystack, they get lost a little bit. With the 8mm, I've got a little bit more of a standout bait. As they're grazing the peg more now, rather than fishing in a little tight pile, it'll just be an easier hook bait for him to pick out. I've not tried one of the Coppins 8s yet, one of the bigger ones, but I will if the fishing starts picking up. So again, 2 lots of 10 pellets, wait for that rig to straighten, and as you're lowering your rig down like this, sometimes, that is unbelievable, sometimes they'll see your pellets going down, you'll see there, my rig had not even gone in the water, but because I was lowering it down, they're following them pellets down, they've took my hook bait straight away. Now I couldn't have scripted that any better. You know, you're not trying to catch these big fish on the drop, that's why my shotting pattern's not strung out and stuff like that. By laying your rig in, you're going to potentially foul up these fish, so I always like to flip my rig past the shelf, let it catch up and manually lower it down, and by doing that you're still giving yourself a chance of getting that bite nice and quickly, or potentially getting one on the drop, but you're in control of your rig and you're not going to foul up them as much. So think about the way you put your rig in and match your shotting pattern to suit. So as you can see, we've been building that swim up. These are the sort of fish you can catch. I'm not going to hold him up too long for you, but double figure fish. You can definitely target these fish by fishing that short pole, so it's not a line to be ignored. Now we've built it up with regular loose feed, we're getting the right stamp of fish and we're having a fantastic day, so do not ignore that short pole line. Let's get him back.